Hi everybody, my name is Jacob Purcell. I'm a tour guide here in Israel, and I met something very Israeli. When you think of Israel, one of the first things that come to your mind are kibbutzim, a kibbutz, a farming collective. And if you come to Israel, you maybe should come to the First Kibbutz. And this is here at a place called Degania, Aleph. Degania, Dagan, the god of grain. The settlers, the Jewish pioneers, came here in 1909. They were mostly from an area today we know as Russia, Ukraine, parts of Hungary, Romania. Back then, that was the Russian Empire. So they established this beautiful kibbutz. Now you have to remember, when they came here, this wasn't here. This beautiful banana plantation and the grass and everything, there wasn't a lot here. What there was malaria, was heat, they had to grow their own food. They were tough cookies, the people that came here back then. Now, when you come to Degania, what you're going to notice is this tank here at the entrance to the kibbutz. And this tank, it's a little thing. You can see it had a two-man crew. But this tank was stopped in its tracks, and literally stopped in its tracks, by people, by the kibbutzniks. Those who live on kibbutz are called kibbutzniks, defending the farm. And this was, of course, in May 1948. When the state of Israel declared independence, Israel was invaded by 5 Arab countries, one of them Syria. Now Syria is, if you look out in the distance there, just above the netting, you might see the Golan Heights. That was Syria up until 1967. And the Syrians just rolled down the valley and came more or less about a couple hundred meters from this banana plantation we see here, and they advanced on the kibbutz. And the idea was, of course, to ethnically cleanse the area of Jews. Okay, so which by the way hasn't really changed. So when you come here, and I take people to this tank so they can see the bravery, because this tank was stopped with Molotov cocktails. They didn't even have bazookas. They didn't have a Piat. That's a very, very accurate anti-tank weapon, sort of like the forerunner of an RPG. And they stopped this tank in its tracks. So when you come to Kibbutz Degania, you have to remember that along with resettling our ancestral home, we had to fight for it. Let's continue our tour inside the kibbutz. Hi everybody, my name is Jacob Purcell. We're back inside the kibbutz here at Degania. We went through the gate. Every kibbutz has a gate. So remember, kibbutz means a sort of a commune, I guess that's what you call it. And all kibbutzim, there's today about 265 of them in Israel, but back then they were all based on agriculture, okay? Because the idea was you redeem yourself through working the land. Why was that? Because when the Jews were exiled from the land of Israel in the year 70, and they gradually made their way to Christian and Muslim countries later in history, they were denied two things that the Jewish people were known for in the ancient world: being good farmers and being good soldiers. So when the pioneers came back at the beginning of the 20th century to the land of Israel to rebuild a nation, they decided that first they're going to be farmers. Okay? They had a saying, to build and to be rebuilt. And they got this idea from a Russian nobleman by the name of Leo Tolstoy. Tolstoy had this ideology that modern man has to find himself again, find his roots in working the land. So this dovetailed nicely with the Zionists. By the way, Zionism, it means that the Jewish people have an ancestral home and that's where we should live, okay? So they came here, land was purchased, and they came here in 1909, and they were a small group of people, men and women, and they farmed the land. They had learned how to be farmers in an agricultural farming school just a few miles down the road. And when they get here, they build this. Now, they got here in 1909. They're living in tents. They start farming the land. It was very arduous work. It's hot here, guys. Okay, today is August 26th, and it is really hot. It's not so bad. It's still in the morning, but it was hot, and there was malaria. So, and there were, of course, Arabs who didn't want them here. So what they did was they built this, what we see here, they built this stone structure in the shape of a square, and this was sort of Fort Apache. The idea was that you would go out, work the fields, and then in the evening you would come here, lock the gate, and be protected. Now, the people here back then were pure socialists. We don't use the C word here in Israel. And they said everything is owned by everybody. Even the clothes on your back was owned by the collective. One family, and more than one family, didn't quite agree with this very intense sort of socialism, and that was the Dayan family. And the first child born on a kibbutz, and this is the first kibbutz, was Moshe Dayan. And he was born right over there. Now, Moshe Dayan, in case, a lot of American Jews think that, Moshe Dayan was the greatest thing since sliced bread. He is not that fondly remembered here in Israel. He was a great fighter. He was a brave man, but he was also a very wily and slippery politician. And you never really knew what he was thinking. But his family decided that the idea of a total socialist commune isn't for them. They wanted to own their own land and work their own land. So they moved to another part of the country, near me actually, in the Jezreel Valley, and they set up a different type of socialist model called a moshav. And a moshav differs from the kibbutz in that you own your own land and work your own land. Everybody has the same amount of land, and you run the community sort of like a New England, old New England town with the town council, and everybody has a vote. It's very democratic. By the way, the kibbutz was different from Bolshevism in that it was totally democratic. Everything was done by consent, by majority vote, okay? So that, of course, did not endear them with the communists who, of course, aligned themselves with then the Soviet Union. So this is just a quick look at the first kibbutz here in Israel. My name is Jacob Forsell, licensed tour guide. Hope to see you soon. Take care.